So I want to highlight one of the weaknesses. Maybe you would identify it the same way, maybe not. But on page 34, Finger talks about four groups: the Roman Catholic perspective, the conservative Protestant perspective, John Calvin, 16th century reformer, and then finally she refers to redaction criticism. And if she understands that this term may not be something that's totally familiar to her audience, and so she's going to try to define it. And she says this: finally, there is redaction criticism, which is much more skeptical about Luke's historical accuracy. Redaction means editing. Redaction scholars see Luke as an editor who shaped the story according to his own political and theological agenda. He wanted to idealize the earliest church to impress and inspire his readers. So he creates this community of goods and applies to the early Christians a Greek utopian phrase that says, friends have all things in common, but it never really happened that way. So that's how she goes about defining redaction criticism. Redact, again, means editing. And redaction critics say that the editing of a biblical book is something that is a robust practice, and it's aimed at framing the argument in such a way that the point is the point, right? Historical accuracy is less important, if important at all. So is this a positive or a negative? Is it a strength or is it a weakness of the article? It's certainly something that's germane to her article. That is, it's important. It's something that I think she probably has to deal with. But here's the thing, especially if you're reading this from the outside in, and if you're not familiar with this kind of terminology, the other groups, the Roman Catholic group, the conservative Protestants, even John Calvin, they all have a face, right? Or they are a recognizable entity. They have a recognizable identity. But redaction criticism, now we're talking about a school of thought. So I think it might have been helpful if she would have identified maybe someone who would have been well known in her context in making this presentation as a redaction critic, or would have said something about each of these other groups that slots them into a certain school of thought. But as it is, it's like you've got person or people, person, and now school of thought. And it seemed a little maybe disjointed to me. Not that it didn't make sense. It made sense to me. I think I think she, again, does a good job of explaining what she's trying to do and explaining the groups of people. But in terms of article symmetry, in terms of understandability for her audience, I'm not really sure that translated. Again, is it something that we can't get beyond? I don't think so. But it's a little bit of a key about good writing as well. Maybe this part should have been beefed up a little bit. So, questions of critique. We've got strengths, we've got weaknesses, we've got thesis, we've got intended audience, we've got all those things. What is she trying to accomplish? What is she trying to stimulate in the reader or the listener? And does she accomplish that? Right? So she sets out an agenda. Does she get it done? Does the body of her writing help make the point about hospitality and about these women? And she wants to bring that forward, right? She wants to bring that into the life of her faith community. Does she do that? Is she successful there? Does she speak mainly or only to one group of people? Are they divided by class, by gender, or ethnicity, or something like that? Or does she speak to one group of people, but the application goes beyond that one group of people? Can we all see ourselves in what she's trying to prove? And then, of course, there's always the question that I ask: why? Why do you say what you say? Why do you say this critique is valid or not valid? Why do you say this this approach worked or does not work? And try to remove that from just the personal. I feel like I think it's this way or that way, but think about evidence. And there's always some opinion in the way we deal with evidence, in the way we deal with data, but try to remember that it's not just about whether you understand the article perfectly, it's how well does the writer make his or her case. And even if it's above our heads sometimes, or maybe you'd say, well, Dr. Ragsdale, this particular article was beneath us, right? But that might be personal feedback, but that's not necessarily whether this particular article accomplishes what it's trying to accomplish. So think about those things as we wrap up this last article for our class. We'll be back in a few minutes to talk about Acts 4:32 to 35.